A very good afternoon to all of you. So we would like to discuss the historical and contemporary legal attitude towards animals. And it's a very important background to our subsequent discussions, especially insofar as they pertain to animal law in Ghana. Now, at the outset, it is important to appreciate that the kind of thinking we have about animals, especially the protection which human beings are obligated to extend to them, has not always been as we have it today. And this has to do with the fact that there have been different ideas regarding the status of animals vis-a-vis human being. And I am very confident that a good number of you are quite aware of some of the things in some of the very good old books, especially the Holy Bible, the Holy Quran, and the other holy books in the other religions. And all these have got very interesting perspectives as far as what animals are in relation to human beings. And of course, we also know that there have been agitation by some group of people called the animal rights advocates to try and assert that the law should actually extend protection to animals. And for that matter, there has even been a claim that animal rights should be recognized as it were. Of course, there have been significant debates on both sides as to whether it is really necessary to have the law going as far as recognizing animal rights and all that. So we would like to first of all look at the ancient period regarding what they're thinking towards recognition of animals being entitled to some protection and so on has been. We look at the medieval times, we look at the 18th and 19th century, and you look at the contemporary time. And I must say that our excursus or our attempt to explore how historically the thinking regarding animal rights and study have evolved in Ghana cannot be without going back to what the situation was as far as England and Wales were concerned, for very good reason. Our very legal system, as we know, as a result of a colonial connection, actually evolved from there. So that is why we should appreciate it that way. So let's keep that in mind. So going back to the ancient period, if you take the ancient Greece, for example, their attitude towards animal was ambivalent. Ambivalent in the sense that, when we say that you're ambivalent about something, that is to say that you cannot more or less be bothered, either this or that. So that was the attitude if you look at it from there. So therefore, in one breath, animals were considered a lesser species, right, in comparison to human beings. And this was based upon the fact that animals could not form a polity. Those of you who know about the ancient Greece history, the polis, that is the city-state, was a very important concept. So you forming like the polis, that is like the polity, there is human beings who could actually form that. And again, it was also thought that animals lack perception of good and evil. And that was why Aristotle would make the statement, which has become a sort of like a cliche, that man is the most excellent of all beings. If you remember that man is the most perfect of all animals. Now, that should tell you something, because Aristotle was thinking that human beings have the ability to form government. Human beings have various gifts, speech, can form society, know what is good and bad, and so on and so forth. That was aspect of the early Greek thought as far as animals were concerned. Now, despite the fact that there were differences between species, in ancient Greeks, they sought to still make animals morally responsible for alleged offenses, especially where an animal killed a human being. Despite the fact that animal doesn't have a conscience, ancient Greece was not prepared to just leave the matter. And of course, and that is why we are talking about the ambivalence. So that we say that in one breath, some people think that, oh, animals, they are just nothing. In another breath, we see that it's like the law is still trying to hold the animals responsible for certain misdeeds, so to speak. And so the fact that in ancient Greeks, animal could be held responsible meant that you could actually get an animal tried, as it were. And of course, it sounds funny, but the underlying principle was, if you like, the less talionis, right, principle. That is to say that something must be punished in equivalence with the gravity of the offense committed. And just like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, if you like, that is the less talionis, which also later on made its way into Mosaic law in the Christian Bible. But let us put it in context. The fact that animals were trial does not to say that ancient Greeks recognized animals as being moral beings. No. They wanted to preserve what we call the moral equilibrium in society. Moral equilibrium in the sense that, if, for example, an animal pounds on a child and probably did kill it and so on and so forth, the moral equilibrium is distorted. So to restore that, justice must be done. So justice being done here, wherever that, if you like, the wrongdoing emanated from, something should be done. So that was the context for trying to say that animals could, for example, be made to face justice for certain wrongdoing. Of course, some philosophers in ancient Greece also advocated for a more humanitarian attitude towards animals, so that the famous Pythagoras, right? At least not just remember the Pythagoras theorem. So Pythagoras, for example, will contend that if you kill an animal, that should be treated as you having committed a murder or homicide of a human being, because they didn't think that animals were not part of our community, that animals shared a sense of community with the human beings. And for that matter, you could not just kill them just like that. So let us keep that in mind. Then again, if we come later on into the Christian Bible, especially the Old Testament, the Hebrews, you notice that there are references to moral responsibility of animals, as well as punishment we meted out to animals for offenses such as murder. So maybe if you have like the time, if you look at Exodus chapter 21, verse 28 to 32, for example, Exodus 21, 28 to 32, I have my Bible just around me. I'll just quote it for you, just to give you the sense. So Exodus 21, 28, quote, when an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned. Ox is an animal, isn't it? Continue. And its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be liable. If the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned, but has not restrained it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is not imposed on the owner, then the owner shall pay whatever is imposed for redemption of the victim's life, and so on and so forth. So we notice that animals were to be punished, even to be stoned to death, if they actually harm human being, as it were. So that should tell you something. Again, if you go to the Persian civilization, ancient Persia, over there too, there were indications that animals are responsible beings. And if you look at the religious laws of the Vendida, those of you who practice aspects of Hinduism and so on, if a mad dog was not muzzled, right, and without barking, if it did not bark and it would not a man or sheep, it was decreed that it be punished for the wounding, as if it had tried to commit murder with premeditation. So that is to say that if a dog, which is mad, it does not bark, and all of a sudden it attacks someone, within the Vendida religious book, that was a serious crime. And there was supposed to be punishment. And the punishment was supposed to be in the form of a progressive mutilation, corresponding with the number of persons or beasts bitten, meaning that if the dog probably attacked 5 people, we are going to cut it, make mutilation on this body about 5 times to correspond to the number of people that they had actually bitten, as it were. And then its ear could, for example, be could be cut. Its tail would also be amputated, and so on. Now, if you come back to the ancient Roman civilization, over there too, they regarded animals as property. So therefore, they were classified as things capable of being owned, and which of the used to be of the household, so that the animals were considered as a part of your property. That was the ancient Romans thinking. So let us keep that in mind. And of course, if unlike the Greeks, if an animal, for example, did a serious damage, it had to be surrendered to the injured party or his family. And this was done for the sake of retaliation. Yeah, so that is, so maybe like you have maybe, let's say your goat or maybe a dangerous animal like probably like a dog. It caused a serious injury. You were supposed to actually, hand it over to the family whose member had been injured by that particular animal. Now let's come to the medieval period. That is, the Christian era. Closer to the Middle Ages and all that, where you have like the Roman Catholic Church, for example, which was quite predominant in terms of giving us a sense of what was good and what was bad, and so on and so forth. And the less Talonist principle, which you've seen already, if you like, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, considered an ancient principle, was succeeded by a system of punishment for human crimes. And the analogy enable extension of such a principle to injuries done by animals. That is to say that oh, this, if you pick a call, I'm using my hotspot. Can you confirm if you are hearing me, please?
Yeah, please, we can hear you.
Oh, right. Okay, that is good. Yeah, so we are just trying to explore how the thinking regarding animals and how the law treats animals in the human relation with animals have also evolved over time. And we're looking at that through the historical continuum, as it were. And you see how in various epoch or various ages, the idea has been emerging. So if you look at the Roman or the medieval era, in terms of why animals were punished, it was not just for ceremonial purpose, as used to be like the case in the early time, but there was a rare character about it. And for that matter, if a town or district, they were annoyed by a scourge of maybe some animals, a court, be it a criminal court or ecclesiastical court, an ecclesiastical court is like a church court, will actually sit and conduct investigation into the alleged annoyance or nuisance caused by the animal. And if the grounds for bringing that animal to trial were found to be sufficient, an advocate will be named. That advocate is a lawyer, will be named to defend the animal or show cause why the animal should not be summoned. And the summons will be served by a court official and will go in a loud and solemn voice, and it will be read at places where the animal frequents, maybe where the animal goes to graze or where the animal actually loits from time to time. And if they refuse to appear after the third call judgment, after the third call, like you blow the noise and then the animals does not eat, then judgment will be entered, meaning that the court will say that the animal is actually guilty of the alleged annoyance and so on. And then the court will issue a warning that the animal should leave that particular district. And if they remain in that district, then there will be a call for solemn exorcism against them. Exorcism is like it's a spiritual ritual trying to drive out demons. So in that case, you see that there was also some element of spirituality coming into the whole thing, because the animal has failed to actually heed like ordinary call. exorcism is going to be performed because now the animal is seen as being possessed, having demon in it. Now, over time, animals came to be treated as being morally culpable, and they were prosecuted for various types of offenses: noise making in church, murder, damage to property, and so on. And a lot of animals actually fulfill such justice. Various types: dogs, cows, flies, goats, grasshoppers. I mean, it may sound laughable to you, but these are matters which have actually occurred before. Don't assume that society has always been controlled by rationality, like the, not until the Renaissance and then the period of Enlightenment, superstition was also very much part of society. So within that context, we should understand why human beings will go to this extent, as it were. And again, as I've indicated, the way animals were treated was also influenced by the fact that the Christian faith also used fear as an instrument of conversion, isn't it? And certain animals were being treated as devils. Let's take pigs, for example. Pigs, remember the famous story in the Bible where the Lord Jesus was actually expelling demons from someone, and then the demon or the person begged that they should be allowed to go into the pigs. And then pigs are seen as what? As devils. And especially if they were black. If they were black pigs, then that means that they were more devils, as it were. And if we take famous scholars like St. Thomas Aquinas, he, for example, will hold the view that it is legitimate to curse animals because they are satellites of Satan, instigated by the powers of hell. That is to say that demons or evil spirits from hell and all that, they use animals as a medium, as an instrument to try and wreak havoc and trouble and so on. And there's no gainsaying the fact that trial of animals during the medieval period was really common. So especially if you look at the period between 824 AD, that is the 9th century, right up to the early 20th century, 1906 AD, the literature tells us that we have about 200 cases involving prosecution of animals in medieval Europe alone. Yeah, so, well, the other argument made is that quite apart from Christian theology or Christian understanding of God, other things also justify prosecution of animals. So, for example, one scholar, a Swiss jurist by the name Austin Bregen, will make the argument that only human beings can be made responsible for criminal acts. And for that matter, if animals were made similarly responsible, they must have undergone some kind of personification, evidenced by the fact that medieval law considered domestic animals to be part of a man's household, and as a result, entitled to the same legal protection as the human beings. Let's understand what this scholar is saying, that yes, if animals are prosecuted at all, it's because we are giving animals, if you like, the status of human beings. If you remember your literature, personification, where you give human features or human attributes to animals or to something, then it's personified. So animals are seen as members of the household. And if members of the household are entitled to protection, then by parity of reason, the animal is also entitled to protection. And that is why they too could be prosecuted if they did wrong or something like that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of various arguments can be exploited in that regard. But coming back closer to our time, if you look at the period between the 18th and the 19th century, where there was a significant rise in concern for the welfare of animals, meaning that people thought that animals were not just property, right? They were not just property which belongs to a person, that animals were also entitled to protection and so on. But when we had the industrial revolution, it really pushed animals to the margin as processes of what? Of production. And for that matter, that's also contributed to the change in attitude of human beings towards animal. If you take Britain, for example, which is the home of the industrial revolution, so to speak, it gave birth to modern day animal welfareism. Why is it so? Because during the industrial revolution and all that, animals were just being overexploited and just being handled anyhow. And that aroused interest in some other concerned members of society to say that, no, we need to agitate, we need to advocate for some protection for animals so that a line can be drawn regarding what can be done and what cannot be done to animals. So that was the emergence of what we call the animal welfareism. And it is pertinent to note that some scholars of the time, including Jeremy Bentham, right? If you look at the Jeremy Bentham, a very respected scholar, he developed the concept of animal suffering. And he was of the view that if people indulge in cruelty against animals, then by reason of that cruelty perpetrated against animals, they ought to be punished on basis of damage to property. And more importantly, from an assault on animals' rights. And for that matter, legal protection was supposed to be extended to animal, so long as an injury towards an animal will be an injury towards an owner. So Jeremy Bentham is trying to say that, yes, the animal is more or less part of you. If your animal is harm, it's like a harm to yourself. And for that matter, you're entitled to compensation. And if you're entitled to compensation, then the animal should be protected so that the animal will not even have to be subjected to cruelty, as it were. Now, after a long period of back and forth lobbying and all that, we saw a passage of a legislation called the Martins Act, passed in 1822. The Martins Act made it an offense to inflict blatant cruelty on animals. So for the first time, if you deliberately inflicted cruelty, for example, if you beat animal, you abuse the animal or ill-treat the animal, that was an offense. And this Martins Act is very monumental because it is the first attempt to legislate on protection of animals in the world. But of course, despite the fact that the Martins Act was the first attempt to legislate in terms of protecting animals against cruelty. There were some lapses in that legislation. For example, certain uses of animal which permit animal cruelty as crystallized into custom in the minds of people, such as bull baiting, right? Bull baiting and bullfight and all that. As far as people were concerned, it was like a very normal thing. And for that matter, there was a disconnect between what the minds of people in society have become accustomed to and what the law was trying to achieve. And I must say that that is one rare difficulty. Anytime you have a gap between what the law says and what the people are used to in their mind, then the law may suffer in terms of what enforcement. So let us keep that in mind. And of course, amendments were made, and some of the amendments, for example, provided for requirement that you needed to feed and water animals properly. You couldn't starve animal. If you starve an animal, that could be interpreted as a certain form of cruelty to the animal. Of course, let me say that my dog at home, I have a certain relationship with it. Either when I'm leaving the house, it will lie, face up, so that I'll rub my hand in the belly and so on. Now, when I also return from work, it will play in the same way with me. So usually, when I get food, when I go for program, they give me food and things like that, I keep it in the car. And when I get home, sometimes I will share it. If I'm hungry, I will share it with the dog. Maybe I eat a part. I want it to see that I'm eating a little bit of it, then I'll give all the rest to it. And I see the tail being wagged like that, meaning that it's really happy. Now, yesterday, when I got home, one of the ladies in our house, she came to help me with the things. There was an item in the polythene bag, and usually because the food I take home is in polythene bag, when the dog saw the polythene bag, it was very excited. It thought that it was one of those things I have brought. Regrettably, it wasn't. So I don't know, it also got angry, and they didn't come to play with me the same way that it does. So meaning that it felt disappointed. And so therefore, the law required that we needed to feed and water animals. But this inflation of ordinary cruelty also shifted to cruelty in scientific experimentation. So if you look in modern times, for example, if you go to some shops, right, in Europe, in Ghana, you don't see that often. They will put a label on the item and say that this has not been tested against animals. Now that label is not for fun. It's quite significant because there are some people, if a product has been tested on animals, right, when it comes to like the product trial, drugs, clinical trial, and if it has been tested against animals, there are some people who think that do not patronize it because for them, animals are entitled to protection. And the animals are entitled to protection. Why do you try something which has not been demonstrated to be safe on animals? If something bad happened to them as a result of that trial, what will you say? And that is why you need to put the statement as whether the trials were done on animals or not done on animals. And don't forget that a lot of things have actually gone on. Of course, if you look at we don't have the time to go through every detail of history, but it is a fact that a lot of dangerous things which human beings intend to use because we are not sure of the first right and what animals. And those who subscribe to the view that animals are also entitled to welfare, they're also entitled to protection, will disagree why you try something where, I mean, whose safety you are not sure of. How can you try it on an animals and all that? So these are some of the things. Now, in the more contemporary times, there have been some other anomalies, as far as attitude towards the animals are concerned. And an abuse of animal is an abuse of human interest in the animal concerned, not just the animal's own sake. So let's look at it. Previously, cruelty seemed to have been towards the rights or the interests of an animal as an entity. But in a modern time, that is not, that seems not necessarily to be the case. For example, human beings, for example, may be worried that if certain abuses are indulging without the necessary legal protection. I've solved this thing from you. And I press the wrong button. Just give me a minute. Okay. Let me share it again. Good. Yeah, so in contemporary times, where cruelty is being perpetrated against animals is because of what we call like the maybe collateral interest, which is being protected. So let's say like the fish, right? That if you put poison in the oceans or in the lake and so on, you're going to kill animals. It's not the animals being killed per se. It is a problem to society. Because the fish will become poison, human being cannot consume it. Or the fish may get extinct, or the other life forms in it. So here, you see that attitude towards animals, and for example, any quest to prevent cruelty, it's not so much about the welfare of animals for that sake, but for the sake of human interests in the animal, so that if something untoward, something negative happens to the animal, ultimately, also harming our interests as well as animals, as it were. And of course, human beings, I think that we are very selfish, isn't it? And if we look at even the vegetation, like deforestation we talk about, yes, don't cut down the plants and trees. Not so much because people love trees or plants, but because when they are cut, the vegetative cover on the earth is being removed, and it's going to feed into climate change and heating and so on and so forth. So that is why we pretend to fall in love with, let's say, those creatures. But of course, those of you who know the Catholic theology, there's a famous saint known as Saint Francis of Assisi. And you can just Google how they call the Saint Francis of Assisi a canticle of creatures. Maybe when you can just Google the canticle of creatures, Saint Francis of Assisi, where he tries to show that God's creatures, other than human beings, are also our brethren, as it were. And for that matter, we must show respect to them and their welfare and so on and so forth. And let's say that when it comes, let's say, hunting, for example, using poison to do hunting is not really the case that human beings love animals so much and would like to prevent animals, from not being, killed and all that. It's just because if you use those strategies to hunt all manner of animals, eventually they'll get extinct, they'll get finished. So those are some of the things you should keep in mind. So here, you see that the attitude towards animals, is becoming more and more instrumentalist, right? Instrumentalist in the sense that we are using the law to protect animals, not for the animals' own sake, but because of human interest in the animals. And that is why we say that the law relating to the animals now may said more or less to be having an instrumentalist view, as it were. And keep some of these things in mind, and then you can be pondering them to see whether that is true or that is not true. But I'd like to submit that likely such a view is the case, as it were. And for that matter, the instrumentalist view of the law will translate into splits into how the law protects animals, so that we have domestic animals, we have a wild and captive animal, and due to the differences in the nature of property or ownership in these animals, be it domestic, be it wild, or be it the captive animal, the material value to they provide human beings are different. And for that matter, the level of legal protection to each of these categories of animals will not be the same. So where, for example, if you have your domestic animals, like, probably your sheep, goat, and so on and so forth, you can readily establish that they are yours. And for that matter, if someone decides to harm them, the law will readily, protect, those animals and your interest in them as well. Compared to, let's say that the hippopotamus out there, or the elephant in the, of course, if you look at the modern international instruments, such as the, what do you call that, the convention, regarding, trade in endangered species, so convention on biodiversity and all that, it has actually changed the narrative. But until the adoption of these international environmental law instruments, one would have argued that some of these animals in the wild were not given higher level of protection by the law than ones which were domestic, or those which have been captive, that which have been, were in the wild, and then they've now been brought into captivity, as it were. Good. So we will end discussion of that particular point here, and I will take any questions or issues that you have before I sign off, and then we set up another class in the course of the week. Okay, I don't see any question or any hand So I assume that there is none, but I'm still waiting if there is any. Let me know. Joanne, you said you couldn't hear me. Is that the case? Joanne? Hello? Yes. You heard me? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you very much.